The bullet hit just beneath my ribs, hard enough to spin me half around before I even felt it. There's always a moment like that, a strange, suspended second where your body hasn't decided whether it's alive or dead. I tasted metal before I felt pain. The air left my lungs in a sharp grunt, and the world narrowed to dust, cordite, and the deafening roar of 6 Navy SEALs fighting for their lives around me. We were deep in hostile ground when the ambush erupted, one operator already bleeding out, 2 more pinned behind shattered stone, comms jammed. Extraction pushed back. The enemy had the high ground and patience. And I knew something they didn't. If I went unconscious, they wouldn't make it out. So I rolled onto my side, hands steady even as blood soaked through my uniform. I tore open my med kit, dumped antiseptic straight into the wound, and forced my fingers inside my own body to find the round. No morphine, no screaming. Just breath discipline and survival. I felt the jagged metal lodged against bone. I gripped it, pulled. The pain exploded white behind my eyes, but I didn't black out. Behind me, over the gunfire, someone whispered in disbelief, "Doc, what the hell are you?" I stayed quiet, because none of them knew the truth about me. Not yet. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to Lady Veteran Stories, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? My name is Senior Chief Ava Mitchell, United States Navy. Corpsman attached to a 6-man SEAL element operating in the eastern mountains of Afghanistan. They call me Doc. They said it with respect, but also with boundaries. To them, I was the safety net, the last line between a wound and a body bag. The one who moved in after the shooting slowed, the one who fixed damage, not the one who made decisions about it. I let them believe that. 3 years before that deployment, I had walked away from something most operators spend a lifetime trying to get into, a classified Joint Task Force precision unit that didn't officially exist. Long-range interdiction. Counter-sniper overwatch. Missions where the difference between clean and catastrophic was measured in half-breaths. I left after a village raid collapsed into chaos. A civilian died in the crossfire. It wasn't my round, but it was my scope. And that distinction never helped me sleep. So I traded distance and glass for gauze and sutures. I told myself if my hands only saved lives, maybe the weight would shift, maybe healing would quiet the noise. The SEALs I was assigned to didn't know any of that history. Commander Grant Holloway was steady, composed, the kind of officer who didn't waste words or men. Chief Daniel Ramirez was older, sharper around the edges, the kind of senior enlisted leader who missed nothing. And then there was Petty Officer Logan Burke, built like a linebacker, direct, skeptical of anything that didn't look like him. He didn't question my qualifications out loud. He questioned my size with his eyes. I'd seen that look before. It never bothered me. Doubt is predictable. Predictable things are manageable. They stopped underestimating me the first week. We were running desert conditioning drills under brutal heat, full kit, steep elevation gain. One of the younger operators, Mason Cole, pushed past his limit without realizing it. By the time he dropped, his skin was flushed and dry, pulse racing, eyes unfocused. The team hesitated, not because they were incompetent, but because heat stroke isn't dramatic like gunfire. It doesn't come with an obvious enemy. I moved without raising my voice. Armor off. Airway clear. IV established in under 30 seconds. Core temperature assessment. Rapid cooling protocol initiated. I directed them like I had absolute authority, because in that moment, I did. Hold his head steady. Elevate slightly. No, not that much. Watch his breathing. Good. Stay with me. No panic. No volume. Just control. Within minutes, his vitals stabilized. The shift in the air was subtle, but real. Burke stopped watching me like a liability. Ramirez watched me like a question. Later that night, as the team cleaned weapons under dim lights, I caught Ramirez glancing at my service record on the secure tablet longer than necessary. His eyes narrowed, not suspicious, calculating. Like he sensed something wasn't fully written. 48 hours later, The mission brief came down. High-value insurgent facilitator operating from a remote mountain compound, responsible for coordinating cross-border weapon movement and ambush logistics. Minimal intel package, too minimal. Satellite imagery was inconsistent, thermal feeds cut in and out. Human source reporting conflicted with drone patterns. Our infiltration route shifted at the last minute due to updated threat analysis. I watched Holloway as he absorbed the revisions. He didn't complain, but his jaw locked tight. Leaders don't show doubt, but they show awareness. And he knew what I knew. When too many variables change too quickly, someone else is controlling the board. We loaded out before dawn. Gear checks were quiet, movements efficient. No wasted motion. Burke handed me extra medical supplies without comment. Ramirez held my gaze half a second longer than normal. "Stay sharp, Doc," he said. "I always do," I replied. The birds lifted us into thin mountain air. Below us, ridgelines cut through the earth like broken glass. I didn't feel fear. I felt pressure, the kind that settles low in your spine when instinct starts whispering. Not everything about this mission was wrong, but something was waiting. And I've learned the hard way that when your instincts speak softly, you listen before they have to scream. The ambush wasn't chaos. It was choreography. We were moving through a narrow mountain pass when the first explosion tore through the rear vehicle. Not a wild detonation, precise placement. It disabled mobility without vaporizing the team. That told me everything. They didn't want us dead immediately. They wanted us contained. Before the dust even settled, a second blast detonated along our flanking approach. Rocks and debris rained down, cutting off our maneuver route. The valley walls amplified the shockwave, trapping us in a bowl of smoke and ringing ears. Then the rifle fire started. Disciplined. Controlled. Not spray and pray. They targeted angles of cover, not bodies. They forced movement. Forced exposure. Burke went down first, shrapnel buried deep in his thigh, arterial spray pulsing through his fingers as he tried to clamp it. Ramirez caught fragmentation across his vest, the impact knocking him flat but not penetrating. Holloway and Cole returned fire, searching for muzzle flash that never lingered long enough. I moved automatically. I slid through dust and stone to Burke, applied a tourniquet high and tight, twisted until he cursed. That meant it was working. I dragged him toward partial cover while rounds cracked inches above us. Ramirez tried to stand. I shoved him down. "Stay low." He didn't argue. That's when the third layer activated. A single, suppressed round, not random, not rushed, deliberate. It hit me just under the ribs. The impact felt like being kicked by something massive and invisible. My lungs emptied in a violent rush. The world flashed white, then narrowed into a tunnel of ringing silence. I dropped, rolled instinctively toward defilade, even before the pain bloomed. Instinct. Training. I wasn't supposed to have any more. I pressed myself flat against stone, forcing air back into my chest. The shot had come from elevation, high ridge, north-facing slope. Roughly 800 meters, maybe slightly more. Angle steep. Wind cross-current drifting left to right through the canyon. I hadn't thought about wind math in 3 years, but it came back like it had been waiting. The SEALs laid down suppressive fire toward multiple ridgelines, but they were guessing. The shooter didn't fire again immediately. He was patient. Radio interference spiked. Static swallowed Holloway's call for air support. Our comms were being jammed or disrupted. That meant coordination, equipment, planning. We weren't fighting a scattered insurgent cell. We were fighting someone who had studied us. Holloway assessed the situation quickly. Fall back to lower ridge, break contact. It was the right call with the information he had. But I felt something he didn't. The sniper hadn't shifted position after the shot. No follow-up. No adjustment. He wasn't chasing targets. He was waiting for movement. That meant confidence. That meant training. Most irregular fighters reposition immediately after firing to avoid counter-detection. The shooter trusted his concealment. He trusted his math, which meant he wasn't guessing. He was calculating, just like I used to. The realization settled heavy in my chest, heavier than the spreading warmth under my vest. I pressed my palm against my side and felt it. Wet, hot, blood pooling beneath body armor. Entry wound, low rib. No exit. That wasn't good. Bert tried to crawl toward me despite his own injury. "Doc, you hit." "I'm fine," I lied automatically. Ramirez's eyes locked onto mine. He knew better. Another round cracked overhead, close enough to chip rock near Holloway's cover. The sniper was tightening the perimeter, not finishing us. Testing. Controlling tempo. We were boxed into terrain that favored elevation dominance. The ambush had been layered to collapse our mobility and isolate us in a kill funnel. Whoever planned this understood special operations tactics. Understood us. And somewhere up on that ridge, behind glass and steel, was someone who thought the outcome was already decided. I adjusted my breathing, forcing it steady despite the fire burning through my side. Pain is data, and the data said I had minutes before blood loss would slow me down. Minutes before shock began whispering. Minutes before my hands stopped being reliable. I looked up toward the ridgeline. The sun glare shimmered off rock, making detection nearly impossible. But I could feel him, the rhythm of it, the discipline. This wasn't luck. This was deliberate. And if I lost consciousness, if I let the darkness win, they would move. And when they moved, he would take them one by one. That's when the understanding settled in, cold and clear. The clock had started, and I was the only one who knew exactly how little time we had left. Pain is loud. It roars through your nerves, floods your vision, tries to convince you that it's the only thing that matters. But discipline is louder. I pressed my back against the rock and forced myself to think like a medic, not a casualty. Entry wound, low rib on the right side. No exit. The round was still inside me, breathing shallow but intact. No bubbling at the wound, lung likely spared. That was the only good news. Blood loss was steady, not catastrophic. Yet, if I passed out, the team lost their corpsman. If the team lost their corpsman, Burke, already pale and shaking from the thigh wound, would bleed out in minutes. I didn't have the luxury of being injured. I tore open my kit again, hands steady despite the tremor trying to creep into my fingers. I drew up local anesthetic and injected directly into the wound channel. The needle sliding into myself should have felt surreal. It didn't. It felt procedural. Ramirez saw what I was doing first. "Doc, no, I need my hands." I cut him off evenly. Another round snapped overhead, chewing rock inches above us. Holloway barked orders for suppressive fire, trying to keep the ridge distracted. Cole shifted position to draw attention. The team moved like professionals under pressure. But they kept glancing at me, because what I was about to do wasn't standard protocol. I took my blade and widened the wound just enough to gain access. Slow. Controlled. Breath in for 4. Hold. Out for 4. The anesthetic dulled the sharp edge, but pressure remained, a deep, grinding sensation that radiated through my spine. My vision flickered at the edges. Burke tried to drag himself closer. "Stop," I ordered. "Focus on your leg. Tighten that tourniquet 2 more turns." He obeyed automatically. I inserted 2 fingers into the wound tract. Heat. Slick muscle. Then metal. The round had lodged against the lower rib, flattened slightly on impact. For a split second, doubt whispered, "You don't have to do this. You can wait." But waiting was death in this valley. So I gripped the bullet and pulled. The pain detonated behind my eyes, a white flash that nearly dropped me flat. My body tried to shut down. I forced air into my lungs, anchored myself to the sound of gunfire. Alive. Stay alive. The bullet came free with a wet scrape. I dropped it beside me in the dust. Ramirez stared at it like it was something unreal. I packed the wound immediately, gauze deep, Pressure firm. Blood soaked through but slowed. I sealed it tight, secured compression, then stitched with quick, efficient motions. Not pretty, but functional. All while speaking to Burke like we were in a controlled clinic instead of a kill zone. Pulse? Fast. Stay with me. Look at me, not your leg. He locked eyes with mine. That's when Ramirez said it quietly, almost to himself. You've done this under fire before. I didn't answer, because if I spoke too much, the past might spill out with it. Another suppressed shot cracked through the valley, closer this time, a deliberate adjustment. The sniper wasn't rushing, he was studying, testing how we reacted to injury, testing how we repositioned. That told me more than any intel brief ever could. He was patient, confident, professionally trained, and he was escalating. I shifted slightly to adjust my field of view. The ridgeline shimmered under heat distortion, but I could feel the geometry of it in my head, likely hide positions along rock fractures. Limited silhouette exposure, clean retreat paths. This wasn't some insurgent with a lucky rifle. This was a precision operator. Someone who understood angles. Someone who understood timing. Someone who was watching me just as closely as I was analyzing him. Holloway crawled beside me. You good? He asked, voice low but urgent. I'll hold, I replied. Not, I'm fine. Not, it's nothing, just the truth. I would hold. Because I didn't need to be uninjured. I just needed to be operational. The next shot hit closer still, kicking dust across my boots. He was tightening the noose. And something inside me, something I had buried under gauze and good intentions, shifted. Up until that moment, I had been reacting, stabilizing, surviving. Now, the calculus changed. This wasn't just about staying alive. It was about ending the threat. I felt the transition happen inside my chest, a cold clarity settling over the pain. Survival mode ended. Hunt mode began. Holloway's voice cut through the gunfire. Defensive hold. We maintain position and wait for air support. It was the correct call for a team under layered ambush. It just wasn't the winning one. I wiped dust from my scope lens, not because I had a rifle yet, but because my brain was already building the picture. Sir, I said evenly, he's at approximately 800 meters. High ridge, north-northeast vector. Slight depression just below the rock shelf. Holloway glanced at me, irritation flashing for half a second. We don't have visual confirmation, Doc. You don't need it, I replied. Wind cross-current from canyon thermal. He's compensating left. That's why the last round drifted low right on impact. Silence. Even under fire, silence can be loud. Holloway studied me like he was recalculating something. How do you know that? He asked. Because I could see the angle in my head. Because I could feel the wind shift across my cheek and translate it into clicks and holds. Because I had spent years living inside distance and breath and trigger discipline. But I didn't give him all of that. I've seen this pattern before, I said instead. Ramirez didn't look at Holloway. He looked at the ridge. Then at me. She's not guessing, he said quietly. Another round cracked, close enough to punch dust into Cole's shoulder. Holloway exhaled once, decision forming. What's your play? I shifted slightly, ignoring the flare of pain under my sutures. There's a Barrett M17 mounted on the rear vehicle. It's exposed, but intact. If I can get to it, I can counter. Burke actually laughed, sharp and disbelieving. Doc, that's 800 meters uphill. You're bleeding. And he's patient, I answered. Which means he thinks we'll stay pinned. Holloway hesitated just long enough to make sure this wasn't ego talking. It wasn't. It was math. If you move now, he said. That was permission. I didn't wait for it twice. I dropped flat and began the crawl toward the disabled vehicle. Gravel bit into my forearms. My side burned with every inch, but I regulated the pain the way I regulated breath. 4 seconds between his shots. He was pacing us, controlling tempo. I counted in my head. 1, 2, 3. On the 4th, I moved. Another crack echoed. Impact striking rock behind where I'd been seconds earlier. He'd anticipated forward movement. Good. That meant he respected the team, which meant he would focus on the highest perceived threat. I had to become that threat. The Barrett rested across the rear mount, partially shielded by twisted metal. Heavy, brutal, unforgiving. I reached it and pulled it free, sliding behind the wreckage for minimal cover. The weight settled into my shoulder, and something inside me aligned. 3 years. 3 years since I'd felt that specific balance. The way the stock presses into bone, the way your pulse becomes something you measure instead of feel. Behind me, the SEALs went quiet, not because the gunfire stopped, because they were watching. The medic had just crawled into a kill lane to retrieve a long-range anti-material rifle. I extended the bipod against broken chassis metal, adjusted for elevation, and brought my eye to the glass. Heat shimmer distorted the ridge, but distortion is predictable if you know how to read it. There. A flicker. Subtle shadow shift just below the shelf. He was tucked into a natural fracture line. Smart. Very smart. Very smart. I adjusted windage 2 clicks right. Elevation slightly higher. My side throbbed, trying to distract me. I ignored it. Breath in, half out, half out. Pause. The first shot thundered through the valley, recoil slamming into my shoulder. Dust burst near the ridge just inches left of where I intended. Behind me, Burke muttered something under his breath. I didn't react. I watched. And I saw it. A micro adjustment. A flinch. He shifted exactly where I expected. He thought I'd miscalculated. He thought I was guessing. I allowed myself the smallest breath of acknowledgement. Now I had confirmation. He was trained Western doctrine. Reposition on perceived error, not actual trajectory. Which meant I had him mapped. Ramirez's voice came low from behind. "Doc, who are you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I chambered another round, and everything inside me went still. The gunfire faded into background noise. The pain receded into data. The wind became numbers. The ridge became geometry. There was no valley, no blood, no blood, no past. Just a single line between my eye and his. And this time, I wasn't reacting. I was deciding. The sniper was good, not lucky, not desperate, good. He shifted after every 2 shots, never repeating the same micro-position twice. Minimal silhouette. Just a suggestion of presence tucked into fractured rock. The heat coming off the ridge created a shimmer that would have blinded anyone who didn't know how to read mirage patterns. I knew how to read them. Thermal distortion rising meant vertical drift correction. Cross-current from the canyon floor meant lateral compensation. Altitude required a slight elevation adjustment beyond standard ballistic tables. My fingers moved across the scope turrets without hesitation. Dial windage. Adjust elevation. Confirm natural point of aim. My shoulder throbbed under recoil anticipation, the fresh sutures pulling tight with every breath. Blood had soaked through the compression dressing, but it was holding. Pain was background noise now. The ridge filled my scope. There. A fractional shift of shadow. I took the first shot. The Barrett roared again, the recoil punching through bone and muscle. The round struck inches left of the hide, close enough to be credible. Not close enough to hit. Behind me, I heard Burke curse under his breath. He thought I missed. The sniper reacted exactly as I predicted. He flinched, then shifted right, slightly lower into the fracture line. He believed I had misread wind drift. That confirmed it. He wasn't improvising like most insurgent marksmen. He was trained in Western doctrine. React to perceived error. Exploit it. He thought he was correcting me, but I was correcting him. I adjusted 2 clicks right. Slight elevation drop. Breath in. EF. Half. Hold. Hold. The world narrowed to reticle and rock. No anger. No emotion. Just geometry and timing. I pressed. The second shot left the barrel with a controlled thunder, echoing through the valley. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then a sharp jerk of movement. The silhouette collapsed backward, rifle slipping from the fracture line. The ridge went still. Not silent. Gunfire from the compound still cracked in the distance, but the ridge itself went dead. No return shot. No reposition. No shadow. Just absence. Burke's voice came first, hushed, hushed. No way. Ramirez didn't say anything immediately. I could hear him exhale slowly, the kind of breath a man releases when something impossible becomes real in front of him. Holloway stayed quiet for several seconds. That told me more than any praise would have. Finally, he spoke. "Doc, what are you?" I kept my eye on the ridge a few beats longer, scanning for secondary movement. Confirming no backup overwatch. Only when I was sure did I pull back from the scope. "Former Joint Task Force precision operator," I said evenly. The words hung there. No one laughed. No one made a joke. Because they'd just watched the proof. You don't fake that kind of shot under that kind of pressure. Burke stared at me like he was recalibrating everything he thought he knew. Ramirez's expression shifted from suspicion to understanding. Holloway gave one sharp nod, not approval, not surprise, acknowledgement. The power dynamic had changed. Not because I wanted it to, because it had to. But the mission wasn't over. The ridge threat was neutralized. The compound below us was not. Movement flickered near the structure, armed personnel repositioning after losing overwatch. The ambush had been a net. We had just cut one side of it. That meant the rest would tighten. "Contact shifting to compound," Cole called out. Holloway immediately transitioned command posture. "Regroup on Doc's position." We push, controlled advance. Not fall back. Push. I felt the shift in his trust. He wasn't looking at me as insurance anymore. He was factoring me into the tactical equation. Gunfire intensified from the compound's upper windows. They were trying to pin us before we could reposition downhill. And that's when I saw it through the glass. A movement that didn't fit. Inside the second floor window, a civilian face. Young. Terrified. Pulled back by someone behind her. My pulse slowed instead of spiking. Hostages. This wasn't just an ambush. It was leverage. And whoever planned it understood something critical about operators like us. We don't disengage when civilians are involved. Which meant the fight had just changed shape. I lowered the rifle slightly, scanning again. There. Another figure. Armed. Positioned deliberately close to the hostage. Using her body as partial cover. Burke saw it next. "Tell me that's not what I think it is." "It is," I said quietly. The sniper had been the gatekeeper. Now the compound was the trap. And we were still deep in hostile ground. Wounded. Low on clean comms. With civilians caught in the center, the valley wasn't done with us. Not even close. We began a controlled withdrawal, bounding back in disciplined intervals, but the compound erupted before we cleared the slope. This wasn't a retreat scenario. It was bait. Automatic fire poured from the second floor. Muzzle flashes flared behind broken shutters. Rounds snapped low, designed to herd us into a tighter arc of movement. They wanted us looking outward, not inward. Then I saw it clearly through the scope. Second floor window. Interior shadow. A man on his knees, hands bound, blood on his temple. Behind him, a teenage girl, maybe 15, being held by the shoulder. A rifle barrel pressed close enough to her that one flinch would end her life. Human shields. Burke swore under his breath. Civilians confirmed. Holloway's jaw hardened. And then we saw him. The facilitator. He stepped into partial view behind them. Calm, deliberate. Not panicked, not rushing. He scanned our movement with cold calculation, weapon low, but ready. He knew exactly what he had. Leverage. If we disengaged, he'd execute them to prove control. If we pushed aggressively, he'd use them as cover. We were locked. Holloway turned toward me, not toward Ramirez, not toward Burke, toward me. Not as a medic, as Overwatch, as solution. "What's your shot?" he asked. I recalculated distance. Longer than the ridge, just over 900 meters downhill, which complicated trajectory. Wind had picked up across the canyon face, cross-current now stronger, unpredictable gusts between rock formations. The angle forced a tighter margin. The insurgent stood slightly behind the father, occasionally shifting position to maintain shield coverage. I tracked his pattern. He moved in rhythm. Every few seconds, he leaned left to scan the ridgeline, then back, then leaned again. The girl's head was directly in line with his chest during most of that movement. If I missed by inches, I closed my eyes for half a second. 3 years ago, I'd sworn I would never again take a shot that risked collateral life. I had buried that oath deep inside myself, convinced healing would be enough. But war doesn't care about promises you make to survive your own guilt. War cares about outcomes. If I didn't take the shot, he would execute them when we repositioned. If I hesitated, that girl would die on her knees. The wind gusted, then stilled, just for a breath. I adjusted elevation for downward angle, compensated for cross drift, reduced holdover by half click based on mirage distortion. Ramirez's voice came low behind me. "You sure?" "No," I answered honestly. Then I steadied. Breath in, half out, half out. Hold. Through the glass, time stretched. The facilitator shifted again, leaning slightly to his left to shout something toward the lower floor. For a fraction of a second, his torso separated from the girl's silhouette. 3 inches of daylight between her shoulder and his rib cage. That was it. That was the window. The wind dropped. The valley exhaled. I pressed. The Barrett thundered. Recoil slammed into my sutured side, sending fire through my ribs, but I held the sight picture through impact. The round struck center mass. The facilitator snapped backward violently, weapon flying from his grip. He dropped before he hit the floor. The girl screamed. The father collapsed sideways. For a split second, I couldn't tell if the shot had passed clean. Then I saw her, still upright. Alive. Ramirez clapped my shoulder once, hard, decisive. Good hit. But the tension didn't break, because gunfire exploded from inside the compound as secondary hostiles realized their leverage had vanished. Holloway didn't hesitate. Push. We advanced hard and fast. Cole breached the lower entrance. Burke covered high windows despite the blood loss in his leg. Ramirez cleared stairwell angles with ruthless precision. I slung the rifle and ran, despite the pain trying to buckle my knees. Inside, chaos echoed. The father lay bleeding from a grazing wound where the facilitator's body had fallen across him. Not catastrophic, but heavy enough to require immediate intervention. The daughter clung to the wall, shaking, eyes locked on me as if I were something unreal. I dropped beside the father and went to work automatically, but even as my hands moved, I felt it. The shift. The team wasn't looking at me the same way anymore. Not as insurance, not as backup, but as something else entirely. And for the first time since I buried my past, I wasn't running from it. I had stepped back into it, on purpose. And this time, I didn't miss. The shot had already been taken. The facilitator was down. But the valley wasn't finished testing us. Gunfire erupted from deeper inside the compound, the second his body hit the floor. Secondary hostiles, loyal, angry, desperate, flooded stairwells and hallways, trying to reclaim control through chaos. Burke and Cole pushed forward, clearing rooms with controlled aggression. Ramirez anchored the stairwell, methodical and precise, cutting down 2 armed men who tried to rush upward. Holloway directed movement like a conductor guiding violence into order. I abandoned the Barrett where it lay and ran inside. The air smelled like dust, cordite, and fear. The father was on the ground where he'd collapsed, blood spreading rapidly beneath his thigh. The facilitator's dying reflex had triggered a round that tore through the man's upper leg before he fell. Femoral bleed. Severe. Fast. The daughter dropped beside him, her hands slick with his blood, eyes wide and unblinking. "Help him," she whispered. Not screamed. Whispered. I slid to my knees. "Look at me," I told her. "He's going to be okay." I didn't promise. I stated it like fact. Tourniquet high and tight. I pulled it above the wound and twisted until the bleeding slowed, then stopped. The father screamed once, then clenched his teeth. Good. Conscious meant perfusion still viable. Pressure dressing reinforced the seal. I moved fast, but not rushed. There's a difference. IV line established in seconds. Saline flowing. I checked pupils. Rapid assessment for secondary injuries. "Ramirez, clear," Burke shouted from the hallway. "Upper level secure." Cole followed. But I stayed focused. Shock sets in quietly. I elevated the father's legs slightly, monitored his pulse. The daughter grabbed my sleeve with shaking fingers. "Is he dying?" "No," I said, meeting her eyes. "He's fighting." Her grip tightened like she needed that sentence to exist. Behind me, Holloway stepped into the room. He wasn't looking at the body of the insurgent. He wasn't looking at the cleared hallways. He was watching my hands. Not evaluating. Understanding. Moments earlier, I had threaded around through 3 inches of open air to stop an execution. Now those same hands were compressing a wound, regulating fluids, keeping a civilian alive. War and mercy in the same breath. When the bleeding stabilized and the father's pulse strengthened under my fingertips, I allowed myself a controlled inhale. He was going to make it to extraction. The daughter's shoulders sagged as the realization settled in. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead briefly to her father's chest. Outside, rotor blades began to echo faintly through the canyon. Air support finally cutting through interference. Burke leaned into the doorway, limping but steady. Area secure. No further movement. Ramirez stepped closer and crouched beside me, his voice low enough that only I could hear it. "You don't have to choose," he said quietly. I glanced at him. "Choose what?" "Between healer and warrior." He nodded toward the hallway where the facilitator's body lay still. "You did both." Controlled. Controlled. No hesitation. For years, I'd treated those two halves of myself like opposing forces. I thought one erased the other. That if I embraced precision, I abandoned compassion. That if I healed, I had to reject the rifle. But kneeling there, blood on my gloves, the echo of recoil still vibrating in my shoulder, I felt something settle, not conflict. Integration. The rotor wash intensified as extraction birds approached. Dust kicked through broken windows. Holloway issued final movement orders. I secured the IV line, double-checked the tourniquet, then helped lift the father onto a makeshift stretcher. The daughter refused to let go of his hand. As we moved him toward the landing zone, she looked up at me. "You saved him," she said. I didn't correct her. Because sometimes survival is a team effort. And sometimes it's one decision at the exact right second. Outside, the valley looked different. Quieter. The ridge where the sniper had hidden was just rock now. The compound no longer a trap, just walls. As the helicopter doors closed and the father was loaded for medevac, Holloway met my eyes. No speech. No dramatic acknowledgement. Just a single nod. And in that nod was something that hadn't been there before. Not surprise, respect. Earned the hard way. For the first time in years, I believed what Ramirez had said. I didn't have to choose. I could protect. And I could heal. And neither erased the other. Back at base, nothing looked different. Same dust. Same hangars. Same smell of jet fuel drifting through morning air. But everything had shifted. No one called me, just Doc again. They still called me Doc, but the word carried weight now, not limitation, not assumption, recognition. Respect in special operations isn't loud. It isn't speeches or applause. It's space made for you at the table. It's silence when you speak. It's trust without hesitation. Burke showed up at the range 3 days after we returned, legs still wrapped, but stubborn as ever. He set a long-range rifle case down beside mine and gave me that sideways look he used when pride and humility were wrestling inside him. "Teach me what you saw up there," he said. Not a joke, not sarcasm, a request. So I did. And wind reading, mirage tracking, breath discipline under stress, how to predict a trained shooter's reposition pattern. He absorbed every word like it was oxygen. Ramirez approached it differently. He didn't ask about technique first. He asked about the past. Not interrogating, not suspicious, just steady. "Joint task force," he said one evening while we cleaned weapons. "That's not something people walk away from lightly." "No," I replied. He waited. So I told him enough of the truth to matter. About the mission that went wrong. About the civilian caught in chaos. About the way guilt can feel heavier than body armor. He didn't try to fix it. He just nodded. "Doesn't matter what you were," he said. "What matters is what you did when it counted." Holloway handled it in his own way. No dramatic debrief, no spotlight. He filed a recommendation up the chain that mentioned composure under fire, tactical adaptability, and decisive action in defense of civilian lives. He didn't mention my injury. He didn't mention the bullet I dug out of myself. Because pain isn't what defines you. Control is. Months later, I found myself in front of a small group of corpsmen assigned to special operations pipelines. Some were confident. Some were nervous. A few carried the same look I used to see in Burke's eyes, wondering if they were being measured and found lacking. I rewrote part of the training block. Combat medicine paired with precision Overwatch fundamentals. Not to turn medics into snipers, but to teach awareness. To teach them how to read terrain, anticipate threat vectors, understand the mind of the shooter they might face. Because the battlefield doesn't separate roles cleanly, it blends them. And if you're going to survive in it, you need to understand both sides of the equation. One afternoon, after a live fire exercise, a young female recruit lingered while the others cleared out. She was sharp, disciplined, and trying very hard not to look uncertain. "Senior Chief," she said carefully, "can I ask you something?" I nodded. "Can you really be both?" I knew exactly what she meant. Can you carry a rifle and still claim compassion? Can you make a lethal decision and still believe you're honorable? I looked at her, really looked, and saw the same fear I once carried. "You don't shoot to kill," I told her. "You shoot to protect." There's a difference. She listened, like the words might change her life. "And you don't heal because you're soft," I continued. "You heal because life matters. Strength and compassion aren't opposites. They're discipline under control." Her shoulders straightened slightly, not because I gave her permission, because she realized she didn't need it. I still carry the scar under my ribs. It aches when the weather shifts. It reminds me of dust, gunfire, and the moment I realized running from part of myself wasn't the same as healing. I was bleeding and wide awake in that valley, wide awake to who I had been and who I chose to be. Sometimes the world doesn't recognize your strength until you're forced to stand alone under fire. And sometimes it only learns who you are when you refuse to fall. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to Lady Veteran Stories. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?